So I feel like we missed an opportunity with this episode in that you could have been dressed in a trench coat and I could have had a sports coat or suit coat and a turtleneck. And we could have done this multi-generational like dress up for today's episode. And we didn't do it.
So you mean like we could do like an Unsolved Mysteries / Dateline type of thing? Like you put like a Chris Hansen, like, why don't you go ahead and have a seat over there? Go ahead and have a seat.
I mean,
I'm Chris Hansen.
Or maybe we could have had you like out in a field, and I could have had this sweet crime lab behind me, with lots of people watching things on screens to make it seem like we're getting things done, but really, that's not how any of this works.
Isn't that funny how so many of these like national news broadcasts, they always love to do that, where it's like, you know, in the cornfields of Iowa, people expect to see equipment and machinery, but not the deceased family that was left in a car here. And then you're just like,
that was a jump. That was a jump, Rob. Like, what the shit? I wasn't ready for that. I was just ready for corn. A nice, relaxing sunset over like some amber fields, and no dead people in a car. Wow. Okay.
Yeah. Then they're interviewing the relatives that are left behind. They're like, I saw that raccoons got in there and ate half of their faces off. That's wild, isn't it? And they're just like, dude, what?
I think that is just some of the best parts of this series. When going back and watching it from like this retrospective of literally, you know, almost 40 years down the line, and just seeing the way people behaved back then versus now.
Oh yeah.
And the idea of like, as we get into this more over, like we talk about reenactments and the fact that you're actually involving people from the incidents in the reenactments. I don't think that'd go today. I don't think it'd happen.
Hey, you know, to some that would look like campiness and like all aged goodness, but really it was original for the time, and that's what made Unsolved Mysteries, you know, such a unique part of pop culture history at this point in time, because there are many people nowadays that obviously see it on Netflix, and you know, that might be their first exposure to it, but Unsolved Mysteries, for the majority of us, this is what formed our nightmares and trauma that we carry with us now.
I mean, this was the true crime craze before the true crime craze existed. Before you got like even like the ID channel that was all just like forensic science, and then eventually when we found out that forensic science wasn't sexy enough and we had to repackage it to make it entertaining, and we get the modern like docu series like crime, true crime, and podcasts, we had Unsolved Mysteries. And even then, like looking at Unsolved Mysteries back when we were growing up versus how it is now on Netflix, it is a very different animal.
It really is. But then again, like you mentioned, there's several decades in between productions, and so the nature of the beast has changed. But Unsolved Mysteries actually began as a mini-series, which was, honestly, it sounds the most 1980s thing you've ever heard of, called Missing. Have you seen this person?
Really, like, this is like very like 80s and 70s, where if you've ever like had the fun of like perusing through Shudder and looking at some of the names of some of these 70s horror movies, it's like no one told these people you don't need a complete sentence for a title.
I was going to say, can we just be creative and come up with a topic? It's like, no. We need to be talking to people as if they're right in front of us.
How would they know what we're trying to do if we don't speak properly to them, Tim? Like, that's, I feel like that would... There's a Tim across from me, like at a board meeting. Like, no. That's how this pitch works. They'll know exactly what we're doing if we give them the full question like this.
Honestly, as ridiculous as that name is, it did actually do really well. So the miniseries was produced by John Cosgrove and Terry Dunn Muir. I think it's Muir.
That's Muir.
But Terry Muir. Yeah. These two guys actually worked together quite a bit on some HBO productions in the same space during this time period. But this Missing, Have You Seen This Person, was a little bit different because it focus solely on missing people, which even nowadays, missing people as a true crime subset is very interesting. It's a rabbit hole that a lot of people go down. So even for 1987, I would say that well has not run dry.
No.
Yeah.
So, and this was hosted by Raymond Burr and Carl Malden. And I'm pretty sure Burr, that was the guy who shot Hamilton, right? That was the one who did that?
So not quite, but I actually went, this is a few years ago, I actually went and tried to track down what these guys were in, because clearly they're not the hosts that they kept, right? Everybody knows who Robert Stack is. But I actually looked into it. So Carl Malden, who obviously, once again, one of the original hosts in the miniseries, he was known for quite a bit of TV and film work, believe it or not, and theater. Apparently he won an Academy Award back in 1954. So actual acting chops, but the one that I thought was the most interesting, Joe, was Raymond Burr, because he was actually in the 1956 movie Godzilla King of the Monsters. And he came back for Godzilla 1985.
He did, and that is actually a pretty difficult. I think his version of that movie is actually pretty hard to get your hands on these days. Most of the of that movie, which starts the Heisei era, is just a dubbed over version of what was released in Japan.
Yeah. So obviously, I can't look back to any specific examples of him. I just remember doing the research and going, okay, all right,
you guys got the guy from Godzilla.
Yeah, well, and an Academy Award winner. It's like these aren't schlubs necessarily, but obviously Robert Stack was the cream in that dairy bucket, and he rose to the top. Yeah.
Yes. Ultra Magnus himself is the one who really sold this show.
Yeah. Which is kind of funny because, Robert Stack, once again, another established actor, and my dad watched a ton of spaghetti westerns. And so when growing up with my dad, and he's obviously still alive, talking like it's,
still with us.
like we're all, he's still with us, but we watched a ton of spaghetti westerns back in the day, and he would be clear to point out when we're watching one of these, he'd go, "Hey, that's Robert Stack." And I'm like, "Whoa, that's Robert Stack, but not as I know him." Yeah, he's 19 years old. It's wow. So it actually helped me realize just how old Robert Stack was in the age before the internet. But what I love about this series, though, is that exactly how it was before the internet, and that it's a TV show that kind of came out of the limitations of the time. Because it became a full show in 1988, and oddly enough, we would get America's Most Wanted and Cops in the following years, in the next year after.
Yeah, it was absolute trendsetter.
Yeah, it kicked off this, the murder porn rage began in the late 80s, believe it or not.
Yeah, and then I think shortly after we do get Rescue 911 with William Shatner. So it's slightly off-center, but still hey, here's real people doing real things.
I don't think this show survives if William Shatner would ever been involved.
It's the same thing as if David Hasselhoff was not in Knight Rider or Baywatch, both of those would have flopped very quickly.
Yeah,
because no one's watching that shit without David Hasselhoff.
Oh yeah, no, hell no. But people did keep watching this show for quite a while with Stack Attack added into it, and Robert Stack would actually end up hosting this series up until the early 2000s, and the show got shopped around a couple times. It was kind of like the Family Guy of its time. It got canceled and then moved to a different network. Rose from the ashes.
Yeah, just couldn't keep the Stack Attack down.
No, absolutely not. I mean, hell, he appeared in Basketball, for God's sake. I mean, that's how great he was. But for me though, this was the go-to program for my family as far as this kind of content went, which I know everybody kind of picked their favorites, but this was, even though it was sensational, it felt more consumable than some of the America's Most Wanted content. And it's weird because this show still scared the shit out of us.
I think I think part of how it worked, as far as like what drew you to it, is there was lots of scary things, especially obviously like the true crime part of it, and that's really is just like a corner of the whole thing, because there is a lot more to Unsolved Mysteries than just like the crime aspect of it all. But when you would get the crime part, I mean, you had people who were like tied to beds and burned alive in their apartments, and all sorts of really creepy shit that humans are doing to each other. And I think what made us keep coming back wasn't sensationalism, like you said. Like, obviously, like America's Most Wanted, it was very much like it is just that all the time in your face, and it was like the train wreck of humanity that you couldn't look away from. But there was just something about the way the Unsolved Mysteries was presented, where you would have like these terrible things happen, but we were always directed more towards like catching the person as opposed to like really looking at the crime as this awful deed, and I don't want to say glorifying the crime itself, but really focusing on this person's still out there, and you might be the person who can help catch them.
Yeah, it is a little bit different take than some of the other true crime shows of the same era, and I think a lot of that happens to fall on the reenactments that represent Unsolved Mysteries, because you're getting several segments in one show, right? You could get up to 5-6 different cases, right? And one thing that I think a lot of people may or may not look fondly back on are the reenactments, because yes, the content would sometimes be absolutely horrific, but then you would look at the people acting it out, and frankly, you see better acting in porn. I mean, yeah, but at the same, here's the weird thing. At the same time, when it comes to reenactments, a lot of times when it comes to true crime stuff, like whether it's audio or video, if there's reenactments involved, I usually check out very fast because it's always bad. It's always bad. But there's something about this series where it's like, you know what, it's bad, but it's passable. It's like a D- in acting, where the other ones are just straight Fs. And I don't know, there's an honesty to how bad it is, almost, in the fact that, you know, one, like you said, like when possible, they use the people who were part of these cases in their reenactments. So you've got people who are like, yeah, my sister was stabbed to death, and it's like, and then you see them like reenacting finding their dead sister, and it's like, what the, like, seriously, like nowadays in the 2000s, like, I think a lot of people would be like, no, like, I'll come on and tell my piece, but I'm not going to try and really relive the trauma that I lived through. But, like, they're just like, nah, fuck it. Like, just get in front of the camera. It'll be fine. And I'm like, yeah, sure. This will help find my sister's killer. I'll do it. Yeah. Which I think is that is the distinction, because when you look at some of the early Unsolved Mysteries and the people that would be commenting on this stuff, this would be the generation that was slightly before our parents, maybe about 5-10 years before them. And then you can kind of see your parents, you know, near as the series kind of goes on, right? Just in terms of age. But the people they tend to talk to on this show, from the reenactments and then the interviews, these aren't people that usually have filters. You know, they're not concerned about ratings. You know, they're not concerned about any of the metrics and the things that they cater reality TV to now. So you have people with glasses that frankly, you know, look like beer bottles, you know, that they're just dark. Everything's tinted like it's cigarette smoke is in the air. And you'll have people who would just be like, I don't know what happened to her. All I know is I woke up that morning and the kids were there, and she wasn't. And you're just like going, this is salt of the earth reality really television.
The one that really gets me every time I go back and watch it is literally from the first episode you can watch. I think it says it's season 1 on Amazon Prime, but I don't think it's actually, it's definitely not actual season 1. But there's a case of a man's wife going missing, and she has agoraphobia, so she always stayed inside, and now suddenly she's out whisking, she's like out and away. And usually in like cases where like a spouse disappears, the the other spouse is like the number one suspect, this is one of those times we watch and be like, that guy fucking did it. Like, no ifs, ands, or buts. He has this like completely dull, monotone voice, which I feel bad saying because, like, honestly, like, that's probably just how he talks. But he sounds guilty.
Yeah.
And then the way he talks about it, like, well, you know, after she went away, my life really improved, and I can't say that I miss her that much. And I was considered a suspect. And I'm not surprised by that, and I really don't care that they think I did it. And it's like, what the fuck?
I remember. I think I'm pretty sure I've seen this one because he's sitting there and he's like, I would never hit her. I would never be violent, and no one else said they saw her that night, but I swear I saw her that night at 2 a.m. And you're sitting there going like, how is this man not in prison and or custody right now?
He could at least take a little bit of acting advice from Tommy Wiseau and be like, it's bullshit. I did not hit her. Hello, Robert. But nothing. He's just like, I don't really care what people think about me.
Oh, hi, Robert. Yeah. He did not kill her. I did not. And that's basically what some of the stuff was like. Because every now and again, you'll see a Dateline episode from like the 90s, maybe early 2000s, and they present people who were suspects, right? But they've been put into prison, and you just don't know it because they're not showing that aspect of it. But in this case, there are plenty of people who are on this who haven't been accused of any crimes. But you're going, was police investigation or were police investigations just that bad? And the answer is yes. They were fucking horrible. It's like, well, yeah, they like talked to the lead investigator and he's like, yeah, we really want to find her, but maybe she doesn't want to be found.
Yeah, no, we talked to everyone who we thought were suspects in the case, and you know, all of them said they were just doing something different that night. And gosh darn it, you know, it just sounds like none of them did it. Really? You don't think anyone's lying? Someone could be just saying they were doing something else, and you know, oh, well, we'll just take them at their word. Like, God. Oh my God!
And that was the fabric of the early, you know, parts of the show, because often you would see the narratives that were being told, they weren't being speculative the majority of the time, because you got different topics across the show, right? So sometimes it would be a surefire murder case, like we've talked about. Other times it would be fugitives who were on the run. That was a very popular topic. Apparently a lot of people escaped prison back in the 80s,
and in
early 90s.
some cases pretty easily. I believe there were like two women who literally like just walking in a line behind an unarmed guard, and they just jumped the fence, got out of there.
There was an episode where one guy was dropped off in the middle of a field, and they just said, yep, we trust that you're going to do what you need to do. We'll leave you here.
Lo and behold, he didn't do what he was supposed to do.
Yeah, it was...
Who would have thought?
It's like, oh gosh, you know, I left him there, and the one thing I didn't think would happen is him leaving. Okay, I'm sorry.
What was they going to do? He was in the middle of the field. Most people are just going to sit there. This guy didn't.
Yeah. Yeah. So I called my captain, and I just said, hey, he left now, and he's like, oh geez,
oh geez, oh
yeah. But that was like half the show were the fugitives escaping, and but the other stuff on this show that kind of elevated it from your standard crime programming was the fact that you would get some of these historical mysteries that would pop in and out. And Joe and I were actually snickering before we started recording because they do mention the Beale ciphers fairly early on in this show.
Yes.
Yeah. And we talked about National Treasure recently, so it kind of makes sense to kind of go down this path for a moment.
Yes. So, I mean, if you're unfamiliar with the story, I might get a little wrong here, but basically there's a man who gets his hands on several gold bars worth quite a few bit of monies. I do not know, I can't remember how much monies it is, so we cannot adjust for inflation this episode, unless Mark has done some secret math that I'm unaware of.
No,
totally
no,
okay.
Sir.
We will do a inflation-free podcast today. So, but anyway, he has a lot of gold, and he buries it, and he decides to leave behind a series of clues, because apparently he's very charitable, and these weren't like simple reminders to tell him where he had buried it. He wanted people to have the chance to find it. And part of the cipher to decode the first set of clues was done using, you guessed it, the Declaration of Independence. And they were, I believe, two brothers who had cracked the cipher and successfully found things that explicitly were the clues from the cipher, roughly in the places where they were supposed to be. But there was a second part of the cipher, and that was not known as to how it could be deciphered. So there were several ideas and several people to try and figure out exactly what these mean. And these were people from different walks of life, including computer programmers, who decided to have algorithms try and figure out just what the hell Beale did with this gold, which gets us to the fun part of the story.
Which is where Unsolved Mysteries absolutely picks up the baton and runs with it in hilarious ways, because as they're telling the story of the Beale ciphers, which, by the way, the reenactments of this were fantastic as they
just
they
a
did
bunch
their
of
best
lost
with it.
guys in the desert. Looks exactly how you're picturing it right now in your mind.
Yeah, but you have the colonial stuff that they're like first showing you. So you have the Beale, cipher being actually created. So you get to see like the that side of it, which is funny. But yeah, then you have these guys all kind of looking around, and of course they're all wearing denim from head to foot, and walking around the middle of nowhere. And then there's the story of this programmer, as you mentioned, who literally leaves his family behind, drops everything he's doing, and they get to him after he's dug like a 30-foot hole in the middle of nowhere. Yeah, because apparently they cracked the code. They're out there in Virginia just digging a hole, and nobody's stopping them.
No one cares. I think the locals are like, you know what? Let them. Just let them do it. It brings people into the town. They come, they buy things. It's fine. This particular guy with the programmer is like, again, like this episode was in 1988. Like it is old. And this guy is saying how like, I know people back home and people around here just talking about how like I'm crazy to leave my job and my wife to come out here and try and find this buried treasure. And all I have to say is that he who laughs last laughs best. Well, it's 2023, and to my knowledge, the gold hasn't been found yet. So I wonder if this guy won, if he is still out there, whether in the hole or out. how hard he's laughing.
He might just still be digging. He's probably in China by now. And
then maybe he cracks a code. He's like, wait a second, I've been doing this wrong the whole time. I have to dig up. Here we go. And it's like, you can't dig up. Yeah.
I was wrong. It was 10 feet to the left.
Oh, okay. Bitch. Someone get me out of the hole.
See, like, and that's part of that campiness that I don't think they ever could have planned for at that point in time. No. Right? Like when you're just producing this stuff and you're sharing it back then, it's like, this is the only frame of reference we have for this. But now you look at it and you're going, yeah, this is like the Curse of Oak Island just 30 years before. And it's just as ridiculous. It's
definitely Peter Venkman with hairless cats and pets and wondering why no credible psychic will come on his show. It's because they think he's a fraud. And even though he knows he's a fraud, he thinks he can do better than what he has. This is where we are. World of the Psychic.
There was one subset of the topics that would scare the piss out of me. And one of them was when there's missing persons / kidnapping segment, okay? And there was a Florida businessman whose wife was kidnapped, and she ended up having to handwrite several letters and telling them what to do, right? And it wasn't just purely a ransom thing. It was like trying to undo the wrongs of the husband's business dealings. Well, they end up actually finding the person who did it. He ends up serving like 19 years in prison. He gets out. They never found the woman. Like the kidnapped woman was never found, but the guy's out of prison,
which is bizarre.
Once again, it's like what kind of justice were we dealing back then? I mean, how does the person who kidnapped another person and never disclose where she is somehow go to prison and get out before anyone knows what happened to her? We still don't.
No clue. And, like, I mean, I doubt this person was reformed. I don't think they learned from their lesson and decided to be a contributing member of society normally. They'd probably kidnap again. Like,
I was going to say, he's a lawyer, so that was the worst part about it.
Oh, man.
But, yeah, dude, that kind of stuff is what makes you shake your head looking at this and going back and you're like, maybe we should take the internet sleuths of today's world and just slap them on like the 1,500 unsolved mysteries that we roughly solved about a fifth of during the run of the show.
Speaking of shaking your head, this brings us to like the final corner of the Unsolved Mysteries groupings of topics, and that is, if it wasn't a missing persons, if it wasn't a historical story or a murder, it was usually something paranormal or extraterrestrial. And very often during these stories, and Robert Stack would be filming, saying about what happened, he would stop and say, "Come on, are we serious with this?" And he would just shake his head.
Yeah. Yeah, boys, what am I doing here? Is this real? What actually happened here? I can just imagine him, like he's sitting there and he's got like a 3-piece suit on in the recording booth, you know, because for some reason it's like 40s fashion in 1980. And that actually made it even more endearing to me that he remained professional even though he didn't believe in any of this stuff. Yeah. Like crazy passionate about the true crime stuff, the missing persons, the families, and trying to get them help and everything. But then you make him have to pretend like he's serious about people seeing ghosts and stuff. And yeah, he just like took a shot before he would do it. Like, all right, here we go. Let's get back in your Stack. We'll get through this episode. Yeah. Well, I mean, the thing was, like, when I watched some of these, I went back to quote unquote season 1 and 2 right away, and there was this episode where there was this East Coast like bed and breakfast thing, and actually it was the Queen Mary.
Okay.
That's what it was. It wasn't. It was the Queen Mary, where people were talking about all the hauntings that were going on with it, and there was this like old mechanic that used to work on it when it was actually running, like when the boat was actually in commission after it came back from World War I, I think it was. And he was saying that he heard like sounds of rushing water and all this like screaming and yelling, and he runs to the area that it's coming from, and there's nothing there. And I'm like, what? So what are we covering here? Like what actually happened then? Like he's just hearing stuff. But then the really stupid part was when they get to the swimming pool area and they're talking about hearing all this giggling and stuff. Probably one of the worst reenactments I ever saw was when they showed the footprints of a supposed child taking steps out of the pool. And to this day, I can't go without laughing at that section.
If you're someone who thinks that child acting is some of the worst acting on the planet, just imagine child acting on a budget. That's what you get.
It wasn't great. The bed and breakfast example that I was thinking about was when this guy is walking through the kitchen of this bed and breakfast thing, and he sees a head sitting on a table in the kitchen, and you can clearly tell it is like a green screen for 1988, and a guy's head where his mouth is just wide open, sitting on the table, and like it's not perfectly synced with the surface, so you can clearly tell that he's like going into it. But he's like, and you can't, obviously, if this is the audio only version of it, like this guy's face looks like dead fish, full on. You know, it's like, and you can't take it seriously. But then like a few minutes later in that same segment, this woman's talking about how she's taking an escalator, and this ghost appears behind her, and it just looks like some unwashed nerd at a comic shop that's supposed to represent this, like, you know, this old Revolution era soldier, and he's just standing there next to her, like, you know, deadpan face, and I'm like, wow, how much did they pay these actors?
Even then, I guess, like, when you're trying to tell someone to, like, either, like, deadpan face or, like, act like a ghost, maybe what you should tell them is, like, I just need you to look. Like, don't do anything, just look. Don't make a face, just look. And they're like, okay, so this is what you want? That's what death looks like is... Yeah. That's what you get.
Yeah. It's like, give me Blue Steel, but, like, the version of it where you need to fart Blue Steel. So it's like, oh, okay. I got it. I got the look.
Mm-hmm.
And it takes you out of it in those paranormal sequences because they're so ridiculous to begin with. And then the acting just takes into full on, wheels falling off territory. It really does.
And it takes you away from even like the vibe that's being set by it outside of the reenactments themselves. And that is what Robert Stack is doing during the show. And what they always typically have him do is he's going to be in his trench coat and a suit underneath, and he'll be out in the field somewhere, typically dark, lit just enough so you can see him, maybe a fog in the background. They have this whole, this mystery vibe to the show, and that your host is out in the field searching for the answers. It's a very, very fun way of showing how, kind of like in the 80s and 90s, we would picture detective work being done by people in a trench coat out looking for clues. And that's what it felt like when you had Robert Stack. But Stack really put a good, 12 years into the show when 12 years and 3 networks that Unsolved Mysteries made it through.
Yeah, and to your point, he would be usually walking down the steps of what looks like some kind of institution, like a courthouse, or relating to the area that he's talking in, and so that did keep things in perspective, right? Pull you back,
bring you back to reality.
We showed you, Yeah, we've showed you one of the most horrific reenactments you've ever seen in your life, and you're probably laughing. But now, Robert Stack is here to bring the trauma back.
In front of the courthouse, with his very calming yet alarming voice that he was able to pull off for the show. It was very interesting how he could both relax you and give you a sense of urgency at the same time. It was baffling the way he could do that. But again, that was very reflective of the era and the decades of the time that he hosted the show. But as we moved away from the show, and again, I think it drops after a season or 2 on Lifetime, with where it ends. It eventually gets picked back up by Spike TV, rest in peace, as that network is also dead. And we switch hosts to none other than I believe it's Uncle...
It's
Cousin Avi. He's going Uncle Avi. That's wrong. Cousin Avi. Dennis Farina himself. And again, to show you that the mood and the vibe has changed with the way we approach our Unsolved Mysteries, is he is no longer in the field sleuthing and detecting, but instead behind him, he has about 15 to 20 people all in this command center with monitors of casework and the reenactments that we'll be seeing on that episode on TV screens, with a big world map that's digital in the background that's constantly shifting between maps and cases. And he is now in what appears to be some sort of TV crime lab, getting us back in the mood for these unsolved mysteries.
And the funniest thing is that you'll see him interacting with someone at a computer when the transitions occur, or someone hands him a piece of paper or something, and it did take on a little bit of a different identity at that point in time. But what it also did, and kind of I think was a weird thing to do, was it repurposed a ton of content from the Stack years.
This is where I just immediately thought of the Avengers, where we've got Robert Downey Jr., Tony Stark is saying, "This man's playing Galaga." He thought none of us would notice, but we did. This is we taught the producers together. It's okay, so we like the show a lot. We're going to update it a little bit. And people are okay, so we're going to have to film new things, right? Obviously, years have passed. There are more murders, more weird sightings, all this stuff. We're going to go out there and get it right. And they're just no. We're actually just going to say and play the same things over again. But won't people notice? Probably not. No.
It's been long enough.
It's been long enough. We don't think to know. And really, did we solve all those cases? Well, no. Well, there you have it. Unsolved mysteries. Unsolved still. Let's go and put them back out there. No one will notice. You noticed.
Which that actually was a little bit jarring, because at that point in time, I hadn't watched Unsolved Mysteries much after the Stack years. So when they did that pseudo revival, I wanted to watch it because I obviously loved the show. But then when I saw it, I was like, wait a second, I know this case. I go, what year is it? And so I remembered that they repurposed a bunch, and occasionally you'd get a new story, but most of it was stuff that was being carried over. And so it lost a little bit of its gusto, but what it did do, which I'm surprised we haven't talked about yet, is it carried forward the most haunting music a TV show has ever created.
Absolutely. This is the thing that no matter what, even because you have the modern version of Unsolved Mysteries, and it uses the same thing. It's jazzed it up a little bit, but the heart of it is still there. And I feel like while the modern version hits very hard and is basically designed for a new generation of viewers, I'm going to say the old one hits just as hard for both our generation who grew up with the show, and I think if you were to go back and rewatch some of these older Unsolved Mysteries, because you've gotten through I think it's 3 seasons on Netflix they have for the modern one.
Yeah, I think there's 3 series.
So you've gotten through the 3 series, and you want more, but you want a host to guide you through it instead of just you progressing from story to story, and you get the music. Yeah. The music will not disappoint you. The rest of the episode, I make no promises and no guarantees.
The whole rest of the episode is it's 95% wild card. Okay, you never know what you're going to get. But that 5%, you're going to be terrified. And there are some specific reasons for that. Okay, so there have been multiple interviews with composer Gary Malkin, who worked on this with Michael Boy, obviously almost 4 decades ago now. And Malkin in particular worked with Cosgrove, who was the executive producer. And that's where we mentioned earlier some of these HBO documentaries that he made. So he brings Malkin over and goes, hey, really want you to do a bang up job here, just like you've done for me in the past. And so Malkin kind of starts to get his head wrapped around this. And he says to himself, my God, the acting is horrible.
my God, I know it's a small part, but we can't do anything about this.
Dear God, this is horrible. You want me to write music for this? And so he said this in multiple interviews, that he goes, the acting was so bad, I wanted the music to make you feel like you were there. Like the music and the score of this, I want that to make you feel the sense of dread that you're supposed to be feeling, because you're not always going to get it from the acting.
And I think,
yes,
I believe it's referred to as the devil's interval, is what they go with, this simplistic yet haunting theme, which I think is perfect for it, because I know, as a young viewer watching the show, it reminded me of kind of a slightly slowed down and warped version of the Exorcist theme. It kind of had some of that same, it kind of hit the same tones here and there. I mean, obviously, they don't sound exactly the same as each other. There's a vast amount of difference between them, but it had these siren-like sounds and these high pitches that it would hit, that it would just, kind of, just hit you, right in the middle of the sternum.
Hey, there's a reason why it's called the devil's interval that you mentioned, okay? And it's because it's tritone music. So the reason why it's called the devil's interval is because they will not play that kind of music in a church. Because when you have music that has so many competing tones in it, it will naturally cause humans to feel dread. So when you have a very high bass sound, right, and then you have that siren sound that you mentioned, and then you throw in synthesizer as the Unsolved Mysteries theme did, your brain is competing for what it needs to be focusing on, and when you're kind of backed into a corner.
Yeah.
Right? Because you're focusing on the bass for a second and you're like, wow, this is scaring the shit out of me. But then you get that siren sound out of nowhere, and that's when the hairs on the back of your neck start
Which makes you wonder,
up.
like, why that is. Because, like, some things make sense, like evolutionary, like why people are afraid of the dark, because predators are out there. Why certain tones will just make me like, ugh. It's because, like, it's probably close to something roaring or an old predatory sound, and we're just, like, instinctually know that's bad, let's get away from it. But to have, like, you know, an interval, like, actually have a combination of, like, competing, like, instruments working. Does that mean, like, at some point in time in human history, there's just some crazy asshole with a bard going around slaughtering people? Like, when that music comes on, we check the fuck out.
Joe, behaviorally, we're always listening, you know, for things that might scare us. We just are. We're always, because we have our bass lines. The majority of us are used to a relative amount of silence or ambient noise, right? So when you start hearing these noises that don't fit, or noises that you just find unpleasing, and then you stack two more on top of that into one song, you're going into fight or flight mode watching a TV show.
And I mean,
that's what that is.
If you're an old English person, you probably, as soon as that comes on, when it comes to fight mode, you're like, hey, there's someone prowling around out there. And then it stops playing, and you just assume it was the wind.
Yeah. Oh, no, it's okay. I'll go
must
back
have been
to
a wind.
now. Yeah. Seriously, though, imagine if you were in a church for some reason. I don't know why either one of us would be there, and they started playing that kind of music there. I doubt you're worshiping a whole lot, because you're probably shitting your pants. And
it's like, do I take this cracker, or is it poisoned? I don't know.
Yeah, right. Yeah, never seen or heard from again after eating that. Yeah. And so that's what's really funny about Malkin here, is that he already had that terrifying bass tone that you hear, that dun, dun. He had that already made. But then when he brought it over to the synthesist named Charles Judge, who the producer set him up with, he added that 80s synthesizer hell that we end up hearing throughout the rest of the song. So that's where that siren noise comes from, you know, all of that stuff. And Malkin actually said in an interview, I think about 10 years ago, that after he scored the show, finished all the music, he went on vacation, and because of all the death and all the things he had seen and the music that he had to put next to it, he barely slept for like weeks after he did that.
I can imagine.
Yeah, he didn't sleep for weeks. I didn't sleep for decades because of his music. So
I guess thank you, because your music had touched us all in the best and worst way possible.
If you have hate mail to write, please address it to Gary Malkin and Michael Boy, and then make sure you add a PS for Charles Judge on the end of that.
So, and one of the last things that we have in the episode is actually taking me, I want to take a step back a little bit and talking about kind of like the personality of Unsolved Mysteries, because like we said, it was very different than others of the time, for like your cops and America's Most Wanted. And part of that, I think, lies into, you know, its attachment, like, or not attachment, but its connection with the audience, and how they'd always have the line that someone out there has probably seen or heard from one of these victims or murderers, and that someone may be you. So this whole idea that there is a way or a possibility that you could help solve one of these cases. And they would often, quite frequently actually, provide updates for the cases they present. And sometimes, in a very odd way, they provide the update shortly after they introduced the case to us in the first place. But and other times it would also be like a week or so after like an episode had aired, and literally someone watching the show said, hey, no, I did see someone like this and fits this description, made a call in and actually got, you know, justice served because of them watching the show.
Which I think is fantastic, because we've seen other shows that came out right around the same time. We talked about America's Most Wanted. Obviously, Cops was just a ball of fire on its own, and Unsolved Mysteries had this tone to it outside of all the things that we've mentioned that really brought it like into the personal realm that you mentioned. Like, you felt like you were sitting down with, you know, with someone in your community and because when you think about the show back then, the internet wasn't really a thing. People were still worried about how many long distance minutes they had. So the idea of crowdsourcing back then was a totally different concept. But this was the show that people were using as the true crime research of the day.
It's basically Discord, kind of.
Yeah, we're going to simplify it and then contradict ourselves and then say it differently so that we're not. But that's basically what it was. I mean, it was. And so it was interesting because, your next door neighbor could have been the person that saw that episode and went, holy shit, that person lives next door to me. And that was how a lot of these cases were solved. I mean,
and looking at the cases, I believe I think they boasted that there were 1,300 cases on the show and 260 of them were solved. And I think 50% of the cases with fugitives were solved on the show. So, for a TV show that isn't any actual detectives, that's not bad. That's all right.
That's pretty good for 1980, 87 through the late 90s, right? But the part that always stuck with me was when Robert Stack, after they talked about a story, he would say, we want to offer our thoughts and sympathies to the victim in this case, or to the family in this case, or to the, we hope that the answers can be found. Or he would always make sure to hit those notes. Like we talked about how he didn't care so much for the supernatural stuff and the aliens, and that was kind of weird to him. But as far as his investment and the care that he put into the rest of it, even the producers mentioned that he was invested in that stuff. Like he dug deep into that. And for an actor to do that, I think that's very unique. Very
I
cool
think it says that, and it's honestly, I think the only one up the original has on like the current iteration of Unsolved Mysteries. Again, there's zero host on current Unsolved. It just goes from one case to the next. But obviously, and in some cases, like that's also just how the media works now. Like we don't necessarily need or want a host. We just want the content delivered to us right away. But having Stack there to, I don't know, like guide us through what's happening was always comforting. And again, like the idea that he really is self-invested in the cases that are being told and sees them as that. They're cases. They're actual people. They're not just stories to entertain us. And him saying that at the end of each episode helps ground the audience and helps, I guess, not humble us, but helps us remember that these are people and not characters being displayed in front of us.
That is what is the unifying difference between the era of true crime that this show represents and nowadays, because there are true crime hosts out there, whether podcasts, video, whatever, and sometimes they're laughing about stuff. They're enjoying the macabre, right? It just doesn't make sense to me. And when you take the way that this is presented and how there's actually a purpose behind it, and it's not just an info card at the end that says, do you have a tip? Call this number. It was like, no. We want to help these people, whether it's helping them find a long lost heir or, finding out where this fugitive went, whatever. It's a totally different presentation. And frankly, I think more people need to learn from that nowadays. I think we're getting, maybe a little too animalistic in our thirst for true crime.
Absolutely. And I think the general populace is not the only group of people this show would try and help out, or they wouldn't always just try and help out the victims, because they'd also try to help out upcoming and young actors, as there are some people who you would not believe found their way into the show, including one very topless, very handsome Matthew McConaughey.
Oh. So this episode resonates with me quite a bit because my brother and I have made fun of this for decades now. And we didn't make fun of the fact that the very serious nature of this episode involved a man who went around flashing his genitals at people. That part of it wasn't funny. But during the reenactment segment of this man is carrying a shotgun with him, and who should try to come to the aid of these people but a very young Matthew McConaughey. And he ends up getting shot in the stomach with his shotgun, and he ends up taking this like 30-foot walk with his hand out, and he's like reaching for the camera, you know, trying to take the gun away from the guy. And it was painful to watch, but we were laughing so hard you couldn't really tell the difference. And yeah, that clip is out there. People are still laughing about that.
That man has an Academy Award. Has appeared in several Lincoln commercials. And I can only assume that while he was on the set of this, and they explained to him, so here's what's going to happen. You're going to be reaching for a gun. You're going to get shot. It's going to be very painful. And we just need to make sure that that's on display here. He looks at the director dead in the eye and he says, you know, I think after I get shot might be the perfect opportunity to take my shirt off. And they just look at him and said, sir, there are like 10 other guys who wanted this job. If you could just do it, or we have to talk to one of them.
Look, it can happen just right between the shots. You don't even have to explain a thing. My shirt's just gone. It's just gone. And that's it. That's all we need to do. No explanation
and
needed.
I could maybe get picked up in a Lincoln for a hearse instead of a Cadillac. I think that'd be classy.
Yes. That'd be just right. That'd be just
We're not
right.
making fun of the macabre. We're making fun of Matthew McConaughey, and we apologize.
Making fun of Matthew McConaughey. Yes. Now, that's what's funny about this, though. So, Taran Killam was also on the show from Saturday Night Live fame, but for our Wisconsin listeners, and maybe some of the Minnesota listeners, who frankly represent a lot of our listeners,
we appreciate you, and we're sorry if we make fun of you. It's out of love, and it's not karaoke. I won't let that go.
Yeah. With all due respect. But Reggie White, former Green Bay Packer, he appeared on the show because his church actually, someone tried to burn down many years ago. So when Reggie White appeared on Unsolved Mysteries, I was doing the Leonardo DiCaprio pointing at the TV like, what? Wait, what? Why is Reggie White on here? He should be sacking someone. You know, why is he here? And then John Bon Jovi appeared on this too, as well as the New Kids on the Block. Like, just okay.
Maybe they're just on the studio that day. Like, yeah, we just need like 4 guys. Hey, you guys, do you want to go do this? We're New Kids on the Block. Yeah, we're sure you're new at the job, but really anyone can do this acting. It's fine.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, sure. Why not?
Yeah. Yeah, look, it's Hollywood, bro. I can blacklist you in a second. You get on that stage. Yeah, you know, at the end of all this, I will say this: this show had to balance a lot of things. Okay, it's a lot of it's heavy-handed. There are some of the things on this show that like your jaw's going to drop. But the one thing that I will always remember about this show is that there was a sense of hope at the end. It wasn't all about the bad shit that went down. They would still try to rein it in, whether it was the Stack Attack, whether it was some of the other hosts in the years that followed. I mean, even Dennis Farina did a decent job of this, where it was about let's help, let's try to instill some positivity into this, and you don't get a whole lot of that these days. But I mean, Joe, what do you think?
I think, again, when we talk about like legacies of like the older content that we review on the show, and this is one where I don't think it needs a ton of explanation. This is something where it is one of those early true crime shows, early reality TV, and these are like the 2 largest, like, for lack of a better word to say it, entertainment platforms that we have today. And while I don't want to say like these wouldn't be here if it wasn't for the show, because honestly that could be a lie. If it wasn't this show, it'd probably be something else, because both of those aspects of reality TV and true crime are kind of tapping into this, almost visceral and honestly some of the awful parts of our humanity that we are just fascinated by and putting it out there for us to see. But the way the show did it, I think, is its legacy. The fact that it was one of the first ones to do it, and it did it well. And we talk about like the campiness and the hookiness of it. It's campy now. Back then, not winning an Emmy by any means, but
Yeah.
It was plausible. It was passable for what it did. And, it went on for 12 seasons with the original host and somehow had the audacity to come back for 8 more with the same stories, just a different guy talking to us about them. And the fact that it did that for 8 seasons, they were like, yeah, sure, we'll watch this again. This helps. Like, are these things solved? Do we want to know more about them? Is that the idea that there is something, like that there are bad things out there and that there is something that potentially we could do about it? I think that's its legacy. While it does show part of the worst parts of humanity, it does call on the best part of it at the same time. And even in the newer version of the show, we did say that a title card doesn't quite have the same feeling as Robert Stack talking about it, but it is something, asking if there's something, if someone knows something or has seen something, a place to go and who to contact to try and, bring some resolution, if not justice, to the people who are involved in these stories. And it is something that I would hope that if true crime, actually endears as a genre and evolves and changes to something new, that at least that survives and that comes forth again.
And if you go back and watch the episodes, which you can watch for free on multiple different platforms, maybe it could be you that solves that mystery.
And I think with that, we would like to thank you for listening to Digital Dissection or watching Digital Dissection, however you were viewing this today. As always, we appreciate all the Dissection crew does for us week after week. Your support goes a long way, and if you happened on the show by accident, which somehow some people still do, it's a big media world out there, so thank you. But why not drop us a line or review or comment on the show? We'd also would love hearing from you, so feel free to message us over at digitaldissectionpodcast@gmail.com. We welcome ideas for future shows and, anything you would like to discuss. And until next time, keep on dissecting.